How is Asa's reign different than the two kings of Judah who came before, and why? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse by verse study of the book of 1 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 9 to 24. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 9. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Kings chapter 15, beginning at verse 9. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Asa became king over Judah, and he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. His grandmother's name was Maacah, the granddaughter of Abishalom. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did his father David. And he banished the perverted persons from the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. Also he removed Maacah, his grandmother, from being queen mother, because she had made an obscene image of Asherah. And Asa cut down her obscene image and burned it by the brook Kidron. But the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was loyal to the Lord all his days. He also brought into the house of the Lord the things which his father had dedicated, and the things which he himself had dedicated, silver and gold and utensils. Now there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. And Baasha, king of Israel, came up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might let none go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa took all the silver and gold that was left in the treasuries of the house of the Lord and the treasuries of the king's house, and delivered them into the hands of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Benhadad, the son of Tabrimon, the son of Hezion, king of Syria, who dwelt in Damascus, saying, Let there be a treaty between you and me, as there was between my father and your father. See, I have sent you a present of silver and gold. Come and break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so that he will withdraw from me. So Benhadad heeded King Asa, and sent captains of his armies against the cities of Israel. He attacked Ijon and Dan, Abel Beth-Maacah, and all Chinneroth, with all the land of Naphtali. Now it happened, when Baasha heard it, that he stopped building Ramah and remained in Tirzah. Then King Asa made a proclamation throughout all Judah. None was exempted. And they took away the stones and timber of Ramah, which Baasha had used for building, and with them King Asa built Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. The rest of all the acts of Asa, all his might, all that he did, and the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? But in the time of his old age he was diseased in his feet. So Asa rested with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father. Then Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his place. We have now come to the third king of Judah, the man named Asa. It has now been about 20 years since the division of Israel into the northern nation of Israel and the southern nation of Judah. Israel in the north is still on their first king, Jeroboam, when Asa comes to the throne in Jeroboam's 20th year, which is around 911 BC. But that will soon change, as during Asa's 41-year reign, we will see 7 kings from 4 different families reign in Israel. This instability in the north will largely continue for the rest of their history, due in large part to God's punishment for their sins of idolatry. However, such idolatry would change in Judah, for the most part, due to Asa's reforms. Banished were the false god temple prostitutes that brought with them homosexuality. Gone were the idols that had been worshipped since the end of Solomon's reign. He even removed his grandmother, Maacah, wife of Rehoboam, from being queen mother because of her idolatry. It is interesting to note that Asa is one of the few kings of Judah whose mother is not mentioned by name. Perhaps that means that she had died by the time Asa took the throne, hence why Maacah was still queen mother at the time of Asa's ascension. But since we don't know, that's really all we can say on the matter. The only thing that Asa failed to remove were all the high places where people worshipped. We're going to find that many of the good kings, though not all, would have trouble removing all these high places in Judah, getting the people to exclusively worship in Jerusalem. But with the scourge of idolatry out of the land, it appears that this is something that the Lord chose to overlook for it is said that Asa was loyal to the Lord all the days of his life. And it is largely because of this that Judah became wealthier during the reign of Asa. No, not as wealthy as in the days of Solomon, but wealthier than they had been since Shishak had ransacked the place about 15 years prior to Asa's reign. Asa accumulated enough wealth that he was able to bring into the house of the Lord some of the things that his father dedicated, as well as things that he dedicated. In 2 Chronicles, we're going to get an expansion of the reigns of Abijam and Asa than we get here in 1 Kings, but for now, all we need to know is that there were battles that Judah won during those days, which can account for some of the spoils of silver and gold being able to be brought to the temple. Coming out of verse 16, we find that there was war between Asa and Baasha all their days. Baasha is the king of Israel and is a man that we have yet to meet, with us leaving Israel when Nadab, Jeroboam's son, took the throne. However, further on down in this chapter, we're going to find that Baasha led a coup against Nadab and seized the throne, bringing an end to the house of Jeroboam, just as the Lord had spoken through Ahijah the prophet back in chapter 14. The reason the author of 1 Kings introduces Baasha early is because of the major conflict that arose between Baasha and Asa. This conflict is further fleshed out in 2 Chronicles, where we find out that in actuality it took place late in Asa's reign, in the 26th year to be exact. Understanding this detail makes the story in 1 Kings make a little bit more sense, for in verse 15 you have Asa bringing gold and silver to the temple to dedicate it, and then in verse 18 it looks like you immediately have him sending this gold away to Ben-Hadad in Syria. But no, in actuality, verse 15 is discussing events early in Asa's reign, while verses 16 to 24 is discussing events late in Asa's reign. What precipitated these events is Baasha, king of Israel, fortifying Ramah in Benjamin in order to isolate Jerusalem and blockade the capital from the north. Now, why would Baasha want to do this? Well, again, 2 Chronicles helps us out by telling us that during the reign of Asa, the north had been experiencing an exodus of citizens to Judah since they saw the Lord was with Judah. So while we say that on the whole Israel had become hard-hearted and unrepentant of their idolatry, let's not assume, like Elijah did, that nobody in Israel cared about true worship, for there were those who did. So in order to stop this exodus, Baasha decided to blockade one of the main ways to get to Jerusalem from Israel, which was Ramah in Benjamin, the same city where Samuel the prophet lived. Now, of course, this provocative move worried Asa, so much so that he used up the treasuries of the house of the Lord and of the king's house in order that he might make a treaty with Ben-Hadad, who was king in Syria at the time. Why might Ben-Hadad have listened to Asa? Well, for one, he was being paid a lot of money. But second, there had been a treaty in the past between the kings of Judah and Syria that came before Asa and the kings of Syria that came before Ben-Hadad. We don't know if this is referring to the early period of the days of Solomon or some treaty since then, but needless to say, some sort of treaty existed in the past that both Ben-Hadad and Asa knew about, which Asa hoped would win Ben-Hadad over. The problem for Ben-Hadad was he had a treaty with Baasha that would need to be broken if he was to hearken to the pleas of Asa. That's where the money sweetened the deal, though, for Ben-Hadad did help Asa out and attacked Israel in the north all the way down to the Sea of Chinnereth, what the New Testament calls the Sea of Galilee. Baasha had to thus turn his attention back to his own territory in order to prevent from being overthrown, and so he abandoned his advances in Ramah. As we read further in 1 Kings, we find that it is soon after this that Baasha will die, leading to a tumultuous 6 years in Israel's history, events that were all precipitated by Baasha's actions here with Asa. 1 Kings then tells us that Asa took away all the stones and timber Baasha had used to fortify Ramah and used that to build up Geba and Mizpah in Benjamin, two cities we've seen in our past Old Testament studies, especially during the days of Samuel and Saul. What the writer of 1 Kings leaves out is the Lord's reaction to what Asa did, something we'll find in 2 Chronicles that God was none too pleased with. We'll save that discussion for then, but let's note for now that the latter few years of Asa's reign was marked with some difficulties of his own making. 1 Kings implies such by telling us that before he died, Asa became diseased in the feet, something that afflicted him for the remaining 2 years of his life. However, neither 1 Kings or 2 Chronicles tells us that Asa departed from serving the Lord, so we shouldn't assume that. But we should simply note that 2 Chronicles tells us a little bit more about Asa's faults than the writer of 1 Kings does. When Asa died after his 41-year reign, his son Jehoshaphat reigned in his place. Thus, when we look at our timeline for the kings of Judah, we have now come all the way down to 870 BC. It is therefore time for the writer of 1 Kings to catch us up with Israel's history, where he had left us off with at about 910 BC. This is something that will take almost all of the rest of 1 Kings to do, but it will be during this time period that we will meet one of the Old Testament's famous prophets, Elijah. So we hope that you will return for all of those studies. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 25 to 34, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.